A man decided to take another man's life because of what he called family fortune. But what he doesn't realize is that someone saw him committing the act. Just before we dive into this story, share with us where you are watching from. If you believe that there are people who can still show bravery in a tense situation, do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The soft glow of the moon illuminated the quiet city streets as James Henderson, an elderly billionaire known for his philanthropy, strolled along a secluded pathway by the river. Clad in a tailored suit and gripping his cane, James was a man who carried the weight of wisdom and secrets. Tonight, however, his usual air of calm was overshadowed by a sense of unease. Earlier that evening, James had attended a charity gala, where he announced a bold initiative to redistribute his wealth to the underprivileged. This decision wasn't without its detractors. Whispers had floated around the room about business partners and relatives who felt entitled to his fortune. But James remained undeterred, believing his wealth could serve a greater purpose. Unbeknownst to him, a shadow had been following him for weeks. Michael, a stepbrother and disgruntled former business associate, had fallen on hard times and harbored a deep resentment toward James. Michael believed James's decision to give away his fortune was a personal slight, a betrayal of the family's legacy. Tonight, Michael's frustration would boil over into a fateful act. As James reached the bridge, his thoughts wandered to his late wife and the legacy they had built together. The stillness of the night was shattered by hurried footsteps behind him. He turned to see Michael, his face twisted with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Michael?" James's voice was calm, but his grip on the cane tightened. "What are you doing here? You think you can just give it all away?" Michael's voice quivered with rage. "Everything the family built? You're spitting on everything we stood for." James's expression softened. "This isn't about the past, Michael. It's about the future. I want to make a difference." Michael's hands trembled as he advanced. "You're not thinking clearly, old man. Maybe you need a reminder of what's really at stake." In one swift motion, Michael shoved James toward the edge of the bridge. James stumbled, his cane clattering to the ground. Before he could regain his footing, Michael pushed him over the railing. A muffled cry escaped James's lips as he disappeared into the dark waters below. Breathing heavily, Michael stared at the river, his mind racing. He didn't notice the pair of wide eyes watching from the shadows. 8-year-old Ben, a curious and intelligent boy who often wandered the streets at night to escape his troubled home, had witnessed the entire incident from behind a tree near the bridge. Terrified but determined, Ben clutched his small flashlight and ran to the water's edge. He scanned the surface, but there was no sign of James. Despite his fear, Ben had seen enough television to know what to do in an emergency. Desperate, he fumbled with his worn-out phone and dialed 911. Ben panicked and shaky but determined to relay what he had just witnessed to the operator. His hands trembling as he held his phone tight. The operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency? Ben, breathing heavily, his voice shaking as he explained what he had seen. There's a man, someone's been thrown into the river. He stammered. It's happening right now. I'm on the bridge near Maple Street and the East Side River. The 911 operator, calm but urgent. Hey sweetie, I need you to stay calm. Can you describe what's happening? Is the man in the water now? Yes. Another man threw him off. Ben replied. He's struggling in the current. I think he's drowning. We need help right now. All right, where are you? Can you tell me your location? The 911 operator asked. I'm at the big bridge, near Maple Street. The attacker is running. He's heading north along the riverbank, but the other one is still in the water. You're doing great. Can you see the man in the water? Yes, he's moving, but he's sinking. Please help him. Understood, the operator said. Emergency services are en route, including police and an ambulance. Do you feel safe remaining at the scene? Ben, hesitating, I'll stay. I can't leave him. Please, just hurry. The 911 operator assured Ben, help is on the way. Can you give me a description of the attacker? Ben tried his best to describe the man he had seen. He's tall, maybe in his late 30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I think his name might be Michael, I overheard shouting before he pushed the man in. Good work, kid, the operator said. Stay where you are, keep your distance, and wait for the responders. Meanwhile, Michael had hurried away earlier, his heart pounding. He believed he had erased the problem, unaware that a child's courage was about to unravel his plan. Police and emergency responders arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting eerie reflections on the river. Ben, still clutching his flashlight, pointed to the spot where James had fallen. Divers plunged into the water, and after what felt like an eternity, they surfaced with James, unconscious but alive. The paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing James and rushing him to the hospital. Detective Sarah Coleman, a sharp investigator with a reputation for tenacity, knelt beside Ben. You did the right thing calling us kid, she said gently. Can you tell me exactly what you saw? Ben's life at home was far from ideal. His parents, Laura and Greg, were constantly at odds, their arguments often echoing through the small apartment. Greg, a factory worker who had grown bitter over the years due to financial struggles, often lashed out at Laura, who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Their fights were loud and intense, leaving Ben feeling like an afterthought in his own family. That evening, another argument erupted over Greg's drinking habits. You've spent half your paycheck on booze again. How are we supposed to pay the bills, Greg? Laura asked. Slamming his fist on the table, Greg snapped. Don't start with me, Laura. I've been working my tail off, and I deserve a break. Laura lowered her voice. And what about Ben? He hears everything. He's scared, Greg. Ben sat in his tiny room, hugging his knees as the shouting grew louder. Feeling suffocated by the tension, he did what he often did when his parents fought. He grabbed his flashlight and slipped out through the back door. The cool night air was his escape, a chance to wander the quiet streets and imagine a world where his family wasn't always in turmoil. That night, his feet led him to the bridge, a place he often visited to watch the water shimmer under the moonlight. But instead of finding solace, he stumbled upon a scene and trauma that would change his life forever, Michael pushing James off the bridge. Although Ben was not willing to share why he was in the area at that time, but he recounted the event about Michael pushing James in the river in vivid detail, his voice steady despite his fear. Sarah's brow furrowed as she took notes, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. Let's get you home, kid, you have done well. Detective Coleman ensured that Ben was taken home safely. Laura, who had seen that a police car stopped outside their home to drop Ben off, panicked. Where have you been, Ben? Did you get into trouble? Mom, I am fine. Ben replied softly. I was worried about you, Laura said. At the hospital, James regained consciousness, although still very weak. He turned his head slightly to the nurse who was taking his vitals. What's going on? Who are those police officers outside my room? He gently asked. A police officer stationed outside James's room was overheard discussing Coleman's name with a colleague, mentioning that she was handling the investigation. The nurse mentioned that law enforcement was investigating the incident that happened. An incident? This jogged James's memory of the attack. I overheard those officers mention Detective Coleman to be in charge of the case, she said. Detective Coleman was known within the city as the lead investigator for high-profile or violent crimes. Realizing the gravity of what had happened and recognizing the name, James insisted on speaking directly with Detective Coleman to ensure the full truth was revealed to the right person. Despite his weakened state, his voice carried authority. I know who did this, he said. It was Michael. You need to get some rest, Mr. Henderson. I would let the officers know so that they can alert Detective Coleman, okay? The nurse was concerned that James wasn't strong enough for some interrogation. Thank you for your help. I would be fine, James assured her. The nurse let the officers outside the room know to alert Detective Coleman. 30 minutes later, James, who was pale but alert, was lying in the hospital bed when Detective Coleman entered, holding a notepad and pen, her badge clipped to her belt. She pulls a chair beside his bed. Detective Coleman begins, "Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Coleman. You asked to see me. How are you feeling?" James, with hoarse voice, "I've been better, Detective. But thank you for coming. I heard you're leading the investigation." "That's correct," she said. "Your case is a priority for us. I understand you've been through a lot. The doctor said you've just regained consciousness, so let's take this slow. Can you tell me what happened?" James paused, his gaze intense. "It was Michael. My own stepbrother. He also happened to be a former business associate for a few years. He pushed me off the bridge, left me to die. I don't know how I survived." Detective Coleman, leaning forward, asked, "Michael? Your stepbrother? Can you tell me why he'd do something like that?" James sighs deeply. "Greed. He's been siphoning money from my accounts for years. I recently started suspecting something, so I began looking into it. I confronted him 3 nights ago. He was too calm. Then, he heard of the big announcement I made at the charity gala I attended yesterday." James continued, "I announced a bold initiative to redistribute my wealth to the underprivileged. That didn't go well with some people, including Michael, I'd guessed." James started to cough loudly. "Mr. Henderson, are you okay? Do you need some water?" He signaled to Sarah, asking for help to sit up. Detective Coleman quickly lent her hand to support James as he sat up, resting his back on the pillows. "Thank you. I am fine now," he said. James continued, "After the gala evening, I needed to take a walk by the river, not knowing that I had a company. Michael said to me, and I remember, 'You think you can just give it all away?' His voice shook with rage. 'Everything the family built? You're spitting on everything we stood for.' That's when he snapped at me." James recounted. Detective Coleman, scribbling through her notes, "Do you have any proof of his embezzlement? Any records or documentation?" James, nodding weakly, "In my home office, there's a locked drawer in my desk. The documents are there with bank statements, transaction logs, everything. He doesn't know I collected them. We'll secure those documents immediately," Detective Coleman said firmly. "Thank you for telling me this, Mr. Henderson. It's crucial evidence." Detective Coleman, softening as she gently clears her throat. "There's something I would like you to know, Mr. Henderson," she said. "There is a boy who called 911. The boy's name is Ben. Do you know him?" James, looking at her intently, "Detective, a boy? He was there and he saw everything? Please, make sure he's safe. He's already spoken to us, and he's safe. You're lucky he was there, Mr. Henderson. His call likely saved your life." James, closing his eyes briefly, "Thank God. I owe him everything." Detective Coleman, standing up, assured James, "We'll ensure justice is served, Mr. Henderson. Michael won't get away with this. For now, focus on recovering. We'll handle the rest." James, gripping her hand weakly, said, "Thank you, Detective. Please don't let him ruin anyone else's life." Detective Sarah Coleman, nodding firmly, "You have my word." She exits the room, determination etched on her face. Armed with Ben's testimony and James's statement, Sarah obtained a warrant for Michael's arrest. The following morning, Michael was apprehended at his apartment, his demeanor shifting from defiance to panic as the evidence mounted against him. The news of James's survival and Michael's arrest spread quickly, capturing the public's attention. 2 weeks later, James is a lot better and he's been back home from the hospital. James and his late wife had one son, Andrew, who lived abroad and worked as a researcher. Andrew wasn't immediately informed about the incident because Michael had deliberately kept James's personal contacts out of reach, isolating him further. Michael had ensured that James's circle was minimal, making it easier to manipulate him. James only lives with his domestic staff in his big mansion. The news of James surviving from drowning and the arrest of Michael had somehow reached Andrew via social media. James was surprised to see Andrew in the big mansion. He arrived just the day before the court begins. Andrew met James sitting on the resting chair in the living room. "Dad, what happened?" Andrew asked, his voice filled with apprehension. "Welcome home, son," James managed to smile. "Good to see you, son. I thought I'd never see you again." "I am here now, Dad," Andrew said calmly. The next day, everyone was gathered at the courthouse, including Andrew. The courtroom was silent as the defense attorney stood to present his argument. Across the room, the little boy, Ben, sat beside his parents, clutching hands and looking nervous yet resolute. Mr. James Henderson, his calm demeanor unshaken, nodded encouragingly toward the boy, signaling his trust in the young witness. The defense lawyer attempted to paint a picture of a desperate man, suggesting that Victor had been manipulated by unseen forces, financial troubles, or even mental instability. However, the prosecution, armed with Ben's testimony and the damning evidence James had gathered, was prepared to dismantle every argument. Ben was called to the stand, and his small voice carried the weight of truth that resonated throughout the courtroom. His testimony, detailing Michael's actions on the bridge and his panicked rush to call 911, was vivid and heart-wrenching. The defense attempted to intimidate Ben, questioning his memory and understanding, but the boy's clarity and sincerity were unshakable. The evidence presented, including Michael's suspicious transactions and his rage about the big announcement James had made at the charity gala evening, painted a clear picture of premeditation to eliminate James and take over the so-called family fortune. The jury seemed visibly affected as the prosecution concluded their argument with a poignant reminder of Mr. Henderson's kindness and the betrayal that led to his near-death experience. Michael's demeanor shifted as the trial progressed. The confidence he once carried was replaced by a hollow expression of defeat. As the judge delivered the verdict, guilty on all charges, gasps and murmurs filled the room. Michael would face a lengthy prison sentence, ensuring justice for Mr. Henderson and a sense of closure for those impacted by his actions. After the trial, Mr. Henderson publicly thanked Ben, his parents, and the authorities for their unwavering efforts. "This little boy," he said, placing a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder, "reminded me that courage comes in all sizes. He's the real hero." Ben's bravery did not go unnoticed. Mr. Henderson, in a show of gratitude and belief in second chances, invited Ben and his parents to his estate, where he thanked the boy personally. "You saved my life," James said, placing a hand on Ben's shoulder. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." True to his word, James funded Ben's education and ensured he and his family had the support they needed to build a brighter future. The bond they formed became a testament to the power of courage and compassion. James funded a community center in Ben's neighborhood, complete with educational resources and activities for children. Ben became a local hero, his bravery inspiring others to stand up for what was right, regardless of age or fear. Mr. James Henderson continued his quiet acts of philanthropy, ensuring his legacy was not just about wealth, but also about compassion and resilience. Ben, now a teenager, and Mr. Henderson maintained their bond, with Ben often visiting the elderly billionaire's estate, where they'd spend afternoons talking about life, courage, and the power of doing good. And so, what began as a dark tale of betrayal and greed transformed into a heartwarming story of justice, redemption, and the incredible strength of a little boy who dared to speak the truth. Michael, meanwhile, struggled to adapt to life behind bars. Letters he wrote to Mr. Henderson expressing regret and remorse went unanswered. Michael, the stepbrother and former business associate's actions had not only cost him his freedom but also his reputation. In prison, Michael began to work on a memoir, a way to reckon with his guilt and, perhaps, find a sliver of redemption. Mr. Henderson's community center became a hub of activity. Named the Ben Center for Courage, it provided a safe space for children to learn, play, and dream. Ben himself often visited the center, sharing his story with other kids, encouraging them to speak up and believe in the power of truth. His parents, who had initially been apprehensive about Ben's involvement in the trial, couldn't be prouder of the young man he was becoming. One day, while visiting the center, Mr. Henderson overheard Ben talking to a group of younger kids. He recounted the story of that fateful night on the bridge, emphasizing not the fear but the courage it took to act. Mr. Henderson, moved by Ben's words, decided to make a surprise announcement. Standing before the gathered crowd, he spoke with a warm smile. "This young man reminded me that courage is not about size, wealth, or power. It's about the heart. And because of his bravery, I've decided to establish a scholarship fund in his name, so that every child who dreams big can achieve big." The gathering erupted in applause. Ben looked up at James, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. It was a moment that cemented their bond as not just friends, but as family. Meanwhile, the broader impact of the trial began to surface. The investigation into corruption in Michael's network revealed others involved in fraudulent activities within Mr. Henderson's company. Several individuals were brought to justice, and Mr. Henderson vowed to use this experience to rebuild his company with integrity at its core. Ben's family, though initially thrust into the spotlight, found peace in their daily lives. As time passed, the bridge where it all began became a place of reflection. A small plaque was placed there in honor of Ben's courage and the justice it brought. Every now and then, Mr. Henderson and Ben would visit the spot, sharing stories and marveling at how a single moment of bravery could change so many lives. As they stood there, Mr. Henderson looked at Ben. "You've changed my life, Ben," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I hope you know, you've changed the world for the better." Ben, now taller and more confident, grinned. "I just did what felt right," he replied, his voice filled with the innocence and wisdom only a child could possess. The story of Ben and Mr. James Henderson continued to inspire the town, serving as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness, courage, and truth have the power to light the way. And one thing is certain, justice had prevailed. One child's bravery had changed countless lives forever. Thank you for watching till the end. Please, give this video a like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.